In recent years, the Chinese Communist Party or CCP leader Xi Jinping has met with Russian President Vladimir Putin 38 times and exchanged about 100 phone calls and letters, which is unparalleled among leaders of major powers in terms of frequency, depth, and breadth of exchanges. After their meeting in Beijing on February 4th, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that the relationship between the two countries continues to climb to new heights without capping. However, since February 24th, this warm relationship seems to have been suddenly put on hold when Putin launched an invasion of Ukraine. In the following days, many Western countries announced the freezing of assets of Russian oligarchs and the expulsion of major Russian banks from the SWIFT international settlement system. The US and the UK announced a ban on imports of Russian oil, and the EU said it was gradually moving away from its dependence on Russian crude oil. Japan, a key member of the global value chain, has also joined the sanctions. The speed and strength of the sanctions imposed on Russia by the US and its allies have surprised Beijing. Beijing doesn't want to challenge the US and its group of allies and has tried to maintain good relations with Europe. Ukraine and several other countries are pressuring Beijing to use its influence with Moscow to mediate the conflict. China has officially thrown some aid to Ukraine and made a public statement that it intends to mediate and negotiate with the two sides. Two major Chinese banks have even restricted financing for Russian goods. When Russia is isolated, China is the only country that can provide financial support with a sizable economy. So, what is the real stance of the CCP? Will it help Putin? Its attitude should become more clear very soon.
中俄关系发展有着
The China-Russia relationship is grounded in a clear logic of history and driven by strong internal dynamics. The friendship between Chinese and Russian peoples is rock solid. There is a bright prospect for cooperation between the two sides. No matter how precarious and challenging the international situation may be, China and Russia will maintain strategic focus and steadily advance our comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for a new era. This is correct. While Moscow has been sanctioned by the West, the CCP regime has extended it a helping hand. On March 2nd, the chairman of the China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission announced that China would introduce sanctions against Russia, especially not unilaterally initiated sanctions, and China would continue to maintain normal economic trade and financial relations with various entities in Russia. This statement has also been confirmed by the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Sanctions are never the fundamental and effective way to solve the issue, but will only bring serious difficulties to the economy and people's livelihood of relevant countries, which will further aggravate division and confrontation. We urge relevant parties not to undermine the legitimate rights and interests of China and other parties when dealing with the Ukrainian issue and their relations with Russia. China and Russia will continue to conduct normal trade cooperation in the spirit of mutual respect, equality, and mutual benefit. In the past few days, many Chinese online shoppers visited the official online Russian store, Russia National Pavilion, the only store authorized by the Russian embassy in China, and snapped up all kinds of snacks and tea from the store. The number of fans of the store has also skyrocketed, increasing by more than 200,000 people on March 2nd alone. On the same day, a video of appreciation appeared on the store's homepage. The ambassador of the Russian Federation Chamber of Commerce in China said that he appreciated the support of Chinese friends for Russia and the Russian National Pavilion, and that he would remember this deep friendship while calling on Chinese netizens to be rational in their spending. Obviously, this phenomena wouldn't have happened without the push of Chinese authorities, although such actions by the Chinese private sector don't offer any significant support to the Russian economy. In reality, what's really significant is the 15 contracts signed by Putin in Beijing during the Winter Olympics. They are estimated to be worth more than $300 billion US, including contracts on oil, gas, and other commodities, as well as Chinese imports of grain, fertilizers, and other commodities from Russia. The contracts are denominated in euros to mitigate the risk of sanctions in American dollars. On the first day of the Russian invasion, China lifted all import restrictions on Russian wheat. Russia's annual wheat exports amount to about US $7.9 billion. By 2024, total trade between the two countries will reach a record US $250 billion. Bilateral trade between Russia and China has surged recently. In the first 2 months of 2022 alone, China's exports to Russia grew 41.5% year-on-year and outpaced all other countries, according to Chinese customs authorities. Russian company TransContainer announced on March 2nd that it signed a third-party cooperation agreement with Chinese freight forwarders to improve the competitiveness of forwarding container traffic from China to Europe. After MasterCard, Visa, and American Express discontinued their services in Russia, Russian banks have turned to Communist China for options. According to a report in Japan's Nikkei on March 3rd, Hong Kong bankers have noticed that the market is selling assets in some emerging market countries and buying assets in China. North America and Western Europe are known as mature markets, while countries outside of these categories are known as emerging markets. Usually, in times of war, riskier emerging country currencies such as the Chinese renminbi are sold off and funds are concentrated in currencies such as the US dollar, which is considered safer. Recently, however, international holdings of RMB assets have been on the rise. It can be presumed that most of it might be Russian money, and it's Russian investors who want to use the RMB for a short period of time to hedge their risks. This is because the current economic sanctions against Russia have been extended to freeze personal assets and some Russian tycoons' funds are being traced. In this situation, it's not safe for Russian investors to hold assets in either US dollars, euros, or pounds, so it's likely that Russian tycoons who have purchased luxury properties in both the UK and the US, among other places, will sell their holdings and switch to RMB assets for a temporary hedge. In late February, an article published on 163.com, one of China's 4 major online portals, claims that the outbreak of the Russian-Ukraine conflict and the shift of the U.S. strategic focus to Russia has created a very good opportunity for the internationalization of China's RMB, which should be carefully capitalized and utilized. With the G7 countries announcing a freeze on Russia's foreign reserves, RMB assets may bring liquidity to Russia. According to the latest data from the Russian Central Bank, Russia has about 13%, equivalent to US $77 billion, of Chinese assets as of June 2021. Some Western dignitaries and relevant industry professionals have now taken note of the special role played by the CCP.
The world has heard China's words about its commitment to global peace and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and playing a positive role in the international community for a very long time now. So it's now up to China and their leaders at this hinge point of history to demonstrate that these are more than just words. No country would have a greater impact right now on Russia's violent aggression towards Ukraine than China joining the rest of the world in denouncing Russia's aggression and applying the same sanctions we have. So far, they have not.
In addition to helping Russia economically, can the CCP help Russia evade sanctions on other fronts as well? It's quite possible because Beijing has a lot of experience. First, it can evade sanctions by using intermediaries to cover up the trading routes. All along, the CCP has been using offshore companies or VIEs to disguise its investment identity and bypass regulation. For example, if a company is set up in the British Virgin Islands, the company's shareholding structure may appear clear, but multiple companies may be involved in between, creating a complicated scenario and making it difficult to investigate. Back during the Korean War, the UN imposed a total embargo on the Chinese government, but the CCP had managed to procure goods on the international market through Hong Kong businessmen. In recent years, although the US has restricted Taiwan from selling chips to Chinese companies, the CCP can still obtain TSMC chips through agents or shell companies through no less than 10 layers of agents. It is reported that the chips obtained by Beijing through these channels are enough for China's 10-year stockpile. Will the CCP continue to do business with Russia using similar means? It seems highly probable. Moreover, there is a clumsier way modeled after the Iranian example of bartering. For example, in the Iran-Iraq war, the CCP supplied Iran with a lot of weapons and equipment. Instead of making payments, Iran bartered with oil. Another example is that in 2003, the UN Security Council imposed a series of sanctions related to Iran's nuclear weapons and arms imports and exports. The first country to impose sanctions was the US, so it was impossible to do business with Iran using US dollars. A Chinese bank, Kunlun Bank, which is a subsidiary of China National Petroleum Corporation, has served as the main official conduit for the Communist Party's purchase of Iranian oil for more than a decade. It has continued to be involved in oil transactions with Iran. Kunlun Bank and Iran, in their transactions, have avoided the SWIFT. Although they use the American dollar as the transaction currency and exchange rate, no real circulation of US dollars occurs in the actual transactions. Iran opened a renminbi business in China and left a large amount of RMB in China so that when they needed to purchase materials, they settled directly in China. This is actually bartering. The third, and perhaps the most common in the future, is the use of RMB for settlement. In October 2015, China's RMB cross-border payment system, or CIPS, went into operation. In 2017, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China launched its RMB clearing bank operations in Moscow. On February 27th, the fourth day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Central Bank of Russia, CBR, said that a number of Russia's banks already have access to CIPS, which could facilitate trade settlement between Russia and China. On the same day, CITIC Capital, a leading Chinese brokerage firm, published a research report. The report argued that the ban on SWIFT for Russia could affect China-Russia trade, and the rise in international energy prices could also cause volatility for China. However, the report continued to say that China and Russia had reached 15 trade agreements before the Winter Olympics, which would not only stabilize China's energy supply but also have initiated a transition from the US dollar settlement to the renminbi settlement between China and Russia. Large banks such as the Bank of China have branches in Russia and can conduct transactions within the group without going through Russian banks, and its associated companies still have channels to make wire transfers. As such, this report declared that the conflict in Ukraine would help promote the process of RMB internationalization. It's just that the CIPS system created by the CCP is still very small at this point. As of December 2021, there are only 75 participating financial institutions, compared to 11,000 participating in the SWIFT. The annual volume of CIPS in 2021 was about US $12 trillion, which is only equivalent to 2 days' worth of transactions of the SWIFT. So it contributes very little in regards to helping Russia in its international trade outside of China. Of course, if the CCP helps Russia circumvent sanctions on the economic front, there is a risk of collateral sanctions from the West. In 2021, China-Russia had a trading volume of US $140 billion, a fraction of China's total trade, which was US $6 trillion. The potential damage to China from collateral sanctions would be enormous. It's also questionable how much spare capital the CCP has to prop up Russia, given its domestic hardships in recent years, such as a series of economic struggles with slowing consumer demand and declining real estate sector. Beijing has also put on a variety of faces when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, suggesting that the CCP is carefully walking a tightrope. In terms of the broader trend, one of the CCP's strategies for dealing with the changing international environment has been to unite with Russia to fight the US and its allies. This strategy started as early as the end of the Cold War. The CCP has been trying to bring Russia into the fold. The expansion of NATO to the east and its strategic confrontation with Russia have pushed Russia to China and made the Sino-Russian relations grow gradually. In the last few decades, between the giant panda and the polar bear, many Western countries have chosen to embrace the giant panda. While the CCP wants to be a world leader or to be on par with the US, it knows that there is actually a big gap between China and the US in real power. The CCP doesn't want to confront the US directly. It's, in fact, worried about the US decoupling from China, because China's rapid growth and economic miracle in the past was actually built on the continued blood transfusion from Wall Street. We will provide more analysis in future episodes on this topic. For a long time, Russia, as a false enemy of the West, has provided the best strategic cover for Beijing. Russia has never really been friends with the CCP, and it has always kept some distance from it and with caution. However, now that the West is focusing solely on Russia for economic sanctions, it will force Moscow and Beijing to actually get closer. It's an opportunity for the CCP. Under these circumstances, Beijing won't want Russia to be completely defeated. It will want an ally that still has some power. Considering China's importance in the global trade, will the West be willing to pressure or impose secondary sanctions for the CCP's support of Russia? Will this lead to a wider tug-of-war? It seems that the real tricky moment for the West is on the horizon.